The sun pressed low in the sky, baking the red earth into hard plates outside the small mud brick home. Inside, the air was still and thick with heat. Amina's swollen feet ached as she rocked her body back and forth, grinding maize against the stone slab with steady rhythm. Sweat slid down her neck. Her wrapper clung to her back. The baby in her belly shifted, rolling low. Then it happened, a sudden sharp tightening deep in her womb, a pain that pulled her breath from her lungs. She paused, her hands trembling on the grinding stone. Another wave followed. Not gentle. Not shy. The kind that wrapped around her bones and declared its purpose. Her breath came in short gasps. She leaned against the mud wall, pressing a hand to her stomach. "Baraka," she whispered, hoping he had just stepped out, that he might answer from the banana trees. But there was no sound. Only the shrill of cicadas and the distant laughter of children playing where the shade met the river bend. Baraka wasn't home. He had left before noon with his best sandals and his polished smile, saying he needed to check on Safia. No word of when he'd return. No apology for leaving a woman 9 months pregnant alone. It had become a pattern since he married the second wife from the next village over, a younger woman with soft hands and no children. Amina had grown used to his fading footsteps, but not to the weight of his absence. Another contraction pulled her back into the moment. She dropped to her knees. Dust clung to her wrapper. She clenched her teeth and pushed herself up slowly, gripping the doorframe for balance. From across the compound, Mama Tunu saw her collapse and rushed over. The elder woman, bent with age but sharp in instinct, didn't hesitate. She placed a hand on Amina's back and steadied her with surprising strength. "Child, is it time?" Mama Tunu asked, eyes narrowed with concern. Amina nodded, sweat beading across her brow. "He's not here." Mama Tunu's jaw tightened. "Let me send Kito to fetch him." "No," Amina's voice cut through the heat. "Let him stay where his heart is." Mama Tunu looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we will do it ourselves." She clapped her hands twice. Within minutes, women began to gather, young, old, mothers, widows. Pots were filled with hot water. Herbs were burned. Clean cloths were laid out. The birthing hut, empty since the last village delivery months ago, was quickly swept and prepared. Inside the home, Amina struggled to breathe evenly. Her body was beginning the work of separation. She tried not to cry. She tried not to scream. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the ceiling beams and whispered a prayer her mother had once taught her in the dead of night. "May the door that opens bring life, not loss." She had waited for this child for 7 long years. 7 years of whispered questions, side glances at gatherings, well-meaning jabs from in-laws, and the final wound, Baraka's decision to bring in Safia. They said it was tradition, that a man had the right. But Amina knew better. It wasn't tradition. It was abandonment dressed in culture. And now, when the moment had finally come, the moment her body chose to break open, he was not here. But the village women were. Mama Tunu crouched beside her, soaking a cloth in cool water and pressing it to Amina's forehead. "You are not alone, daughter," she murmured. "We will catch this baby together." Another wave of pain rolled through Amina's body, this one harder, deeper, as if her bones were trying to crack open the world. She gripped the side of the wooden bedpost and groaned. Her knees shook. The room blurred. "Breathe, Amina," one of the younger women said gently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Amina focused, pulling herself back to the breath. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale again. Her breath became her drumbeat. Her pain became her path. Outside, someone asked if Baraka had been fetched yet. "He's with Safia," Mama Tunu replied sharply. "Let him be." They all understood. The woman in labor would be carried not by the man who planted the seed, but by the hands of women who knew pain, who had held it, birthed it, buried it, survived it. Each contraction felt closer to thunder. Amina clenched her jaw, whispering the names of women who came before her. Her mother, her aunt, her grandmother. Women who gave birth with no fanfare, no praise. Only grit and love and the whisper of survival. Mama Tunu dipped a bundle of lavender in water and laid it beside her. "For peace," she said. But peace wasn't what Amina felt. Not yet. She felt rage, deep and quiet. Not the kind that shouts or breaks dishes. The kind that simmers in the belly right alongside new life. She wasn't angry because Baraka left. She was angry because deep down she had known he would. And still she had waited for him. Still she had hoped. Another contraction. This one bent her forward. She grunted and Mama Tunu smiled faintly. "You're getting close. I can see it in your eyes." "Let it be over soon," Amina whispered. Mama Tunu took her hand. It will be over. But something golden is coming through the pain. Amina let that thought hold her like a prayer. Outside, a girl ran through the compound yelling, "He's not coming. Baraka won't leave Safia's home. He said she needs him." Mama Tunu didn't flinch. "Then let him stay. We will do the rest." And they did. As the sun dipped beneath the baobab trees, a circle of women surrounded Amina, chanting softly, working in unison like a single ancient body. They sang not to distract her from the pain, but to remind her that she was more than it. Amina clenched her teeth, breathed, pushed. She was not just a wife left in labor. She was a woman giving birth to gold. Baraka had not always been this man, the one who walked with polished pride and forgot the woman who once held his every dream together. There was a time not long ago, when his steps always found their way back to Amina's door. When he used to come home with wildflowers clumsily tucked in the fold of his shirt, smile crooked, cheeks full of apology for being late. When he would place his hand on her empty belly and whisper promises of forever, of children who would run barefoot through the cassava fields, of a love that no season could wither. But time tests all things. And when Amina's womb remained silent year after year, so did Baraka's promises. The first years of their marriage had been filled with hope. Amina brewed fertility herbs from Mama Tunu's instructions. Baraka fasted and visited healers. They prayed together under moonlight, heads bent like folded leaves. But each new moon came and went, and Amina remained childless. First came the suggestions, then the stares, and finally the silence between them, sharp as broken bone. By the 5th year, Baraka changed. It started with sighs too long after meals. With long stares across courtyards where mothers carried babies on their backs. With nights when he did not come home until the cocks crowed. And then, without ceremony, he brought home Safia. She was young, barely 20, with smooth skin and laughter that curled like incense. She was from a distant village, the niece of a well-known herbal merchant. She carried no history, no burden of failed expectations. Baraka introduced her to Amina one evening with the flatness of someone announcing rain. "This is my second wife," he had said. "You will both live in peace." Amina had not spoken. Not because she couldn't, but because there were no words in her throat that day that would not taste of blood. Baraka built a small house for Safia in the neighboring village of Kandoy, less than an hour's walk but far enough that her presence wouldn't cloud the compound. He began to divide his time between the two homes. But it was clear from the beginning where his heart leaned. To Safia, he brought fabric from the city and earrings shaped like moons. To Amina, he brought silence and the sound of sandals leaving too soon. When people asked why he favored Safia, he would laugh and say, "She's gentle. She doesn't carry bitterness like some women." They would nod, pretending not to hear the cruelty hidden in that jest. On the day Amina went into labor, Baraka was in Kandoy. He had left early, telling Mama Tunu he had urgent matters to handle. In truth, he carried no urgency in his steps. He stopped to buy roasted groundnuts along the way, tossing some to the children who followed him. The day was warm, breezy. A good day for visiting a wife who still smiled when she saw him. At Safia's house, laughter floated from the kitchen. She had prepared goat meat marinated in tamarind and garlic. The scent hit Baraka as soon as he entered, and he grinned like a boy returning from war. They ate beneath the guava tree, Safia feeding him morsels between giggles. "You eat like a chief," she teased. "And you cook like a queen," he replied, licking grease from his fingers. "How can I leave you for even one night?" "Then don't," she said, laying her head on his shoulder. "You didn't?" Back in the main village, the sun was beginning to dip, and Amina's cries had begun. Word reached one of the boys playing near the market that Baraka's wife was in labor. The boy ran the full stretch of the road to Kandoy, dust rising behind him. He reached Safia's home breathless. "Baraka. Your wife, Amina, she's in labor. Mama Tunu says come quickly." Baraka raised an eyebrow but didn't stand. "She'll manage," he muttered. "But she's alone. She has women. That's their work. Let them do it." The boy blinked, unsure if he should wait. Safia reached for a mango slice and fed Baraka another piece, stroking his cheek. He waved the boy off. "Go on. Tell them I'll come in the morning." And the boy ran back, unsure whether he was carrying a message or a wound. At that moment, Amina's fingers were digging into the earth as another contraction threatened to split her in two. The birthing hut echoed with low groans and whispered prayers. The village women worked without rest, their arms moving with practiced grace. Yet deep in the core of it all, at the center of all that effort, was a woman holding pain that no chant could soothe. Mama Tunu wiped her brow and shook her head. This girl carries fire in her spine. The midwife beside her glanced at Amina's face, eyes locked, jaw clenched. Fire, and something more. And far away, Baraka lay with his head in Safia's lap, his belly full, his mind quiet. He did not dream of Amina. He did not remember the flowers he once picked for her or the nights they counted stars waiting for a future that never came. He had rewritten his loyalty in comfort, and now comfort lulled him like a child in a cradle. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that while he laughed over goat meat and mangoes, the earth beneath his first wife had opened, and something gold was rising through the pain. Because love that leaves when hardship arrives was never love at all. It was only convenience dressed in affection, waiting for an easier story. The sun had dropped below the line of the hills, casting long shadows that reached like fingers toward Amina's home. The air had turned cooler, and the scent of burned cassava leaves drifted through the village. But inside the birthing hut, heat built like a storm. Steam rose from pots of boiling herbs. Lamps burned low, casting flickers across the mud walls. And at the center of it all, Amina labored, legs trembling, hands clenched into the earth beneath her, hair damp and plastered to her forehead. She cried out once, just once, and that cry rippled through the walls like thunder. But after that there was only breath. Heavy, controlled, like the breath of a warrior at the start of battle. Mama Tunu took her place at Amina's side, lowering herself slowly onto the mat beside her. She rolled a damp cloth, placed it between Amina's teeth to bite down. She whispered nothing. Her presence was enough. Her eyes watched every movement, catching every ripple that passed through Amina's body. Outside, the women moved like water, fluid, instinctual, unified. Young girls fetched water from the well, careful not to spill a drop. Middle-aged mothers ground herbs and roots, chanting as they worked. One stirred crushed cloves and eucalyptus into a steaming bowl. Another burned dried neem leaves in a clay pot, the smoke curling into protective shapes above the hut's doorway. And then came the song, low at first, a hum, a single voice. A second joined, then a third, and soon the compound echoed with the ancient lullaby of birthing. A song only sung when life pushed against the edge of death. A song only women knew. The melody was older than memory, passed from midwife to midwife, from womb to womb. Inside, Amina didn't sing. She didn't cry out again. She kept her jaw tight, her eyes locked on the wooden beam above her. She bears pain like earth holds roots, whispered one of the women. Quiet strength, another answered. The kind men don't recognize until it feeds their children. Mama Tanu nodded. She is her mother's daughter. That one never screamed when they pulled her child from the river. Just held him and wept without sound. The women worked in shifts, wiping Amina's skin, adjusting the cloth under her back, encouraging her with hands on shoulders, with silent looks that said, "You are not alone." They did not speak Baraka's name. No one asked where he was. They had already answered that question with their feet, with their hands, with their presence. In a place where a husband was absent, they had arrived, not to replace him but to surround what he abandoned. Amina blinked up at Mama Tunu. Her lips moved but no sound came. Mama Tunu leaned close. "It is coming. You are strong, child. You are carrying more than a baby. You are carrying proof." Proof of what? Amina managed through clenched teeth. Proof that we do not die just because they leave. Another contraction surged and Amina arched her back. Her fingernails dug into the woven mat, her feet pushed against the floor. The midwife moved swiftly, checking the baby's position. The head is near. One more good push. Amina closed her eyes. She thought of nothing and everything. She thought of the night Baraka had slipped out of bed. Of the day he returned with Safia's shy smile behind him. Of the silence he brought home like mud on his feet. But mostly she thought of her own breath. Of the heart that kept beating inside her chest despite everything. Of this life coming through her, not because of love but in spite of its absence. She pushed. The room tightened with expectation. Outside the singing rose, higher, fiercer, older. Women stood shoulder to shoulder, some with infants tied to their backs, some with gray streaks in their braids. They were not midwives by training but by blood, by duty, by choice. They had come because they knew. They had once bled alone. They had once waited for men who never returned. And now they refused to let another woman walk through fire without hands holding her steady. The chant shifted into claps. The rhythm quickened. Inside the hut, the baby crowned. One more push. A final trembling breath. And then, the cry. Not Amina's. Not the women's. But the sharp, high-pitched cry of new life slicing through the air like a drumbeat in silence. Amina collapsed back onto the mat, gasping, eyes wide with shock and relief. Mama Tunu cradled the child, a girl, pink and perfect, wrapped in the cloth they had laid beside the fire. She pressed the baby into Amina's chest. Amina held her daughter with both arms. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. She simply stared. And the baby stared back, as if already knowing her mother's strength, as if already inheriting it. Mama Tunu placed a hand on Amina's head. "She is not just born," she said softly. "She is delivered. And so are you." Outside, the women clapped louder. Some wept. Some danced in place. One whispered, "She was not alone." Another answered, "She never will be." Because when marriage fails and a man walks away, it is the women who remain. And in their hands, in their song, in their silence, they become the womb that never abandons. The birth hut was quiet now, save for the crackling of the fire near the doorway and the soft rustle of cloth as women moved around with careful grace. The herbs in the clay pot had burned low, releasing their final wisps of sacred smoke. Outside, the women still hummed, but the chant had dulled, subdued by the weight of time and tension. The air inside had thickened, less with heat, more with the heaviness of waiting. Amina lay flat on the mat, her wrapper damp with sweat, her hair matted to her face. Her legs were slightly raised, her arms limp by her sides. Her chest rose and fell with laborious effort, and her eyes fluttered open only for seconds at a time. Every push had begun to feel like lifting a mountain with her breath. Mama Tunu bent close to her ear and whispered, "Stay with us, child. The baby's coming, but it's turning slow. You must fight." Amina nodded weakly, but no sound left her lips. The midwife moved between her legs, her voice calm but firm. "The baby shifted. It's not coming head first. We must turn her." A younger helper moved to lift Amina's shoulder. Another rubbed her lower back. Another offered a bitter root to chew for strength. But Amina was no longer with them completely. Her mind had begun to drift, beyond the fire, beyond the walls. She felt herself floating, pulled between pain and memory, between this moment and another. She was a child again, sitting by a fire with her mother in the hills of Njala. It was the last night they were together, before sickness carried her mother away like smoke and wind. That night, Amina had asked her, "Why do women cry when no one is watching?" And her mother had answered with a smile, "Because we were born to carry light in darkness. But sometimes even light needs to rest." Amina blinked as the memory dissolved, replaced by a flash of pain so sharp it bent her body upward in a rigid arch. "She's pushing again," the midwife said urgently. Mama Tunu wiped Amina's face with a cool cloth and held her gaze. "Don't go quiet now. Speak to us, even if it's just in your eyes." But Amina didn't speak. She couldn't. Words were too far. They lived on the other side of her exhaustion. Her body, however, remembered. It remembered her years of waiting. The midnight prayers. The shame. The pity. The way her husband's laughter had changed. The way his footsteps always sounded like he was walking away. Her body remembered how many times she had held her womb, praying it would grow. And now that it had, she would not let go. With one last grip of the mat, she turned her face upward and took in a breath so deep it shook her ribs. Her arms tensed. Her fingers dug into the soil beneath her. And she pushed, not only with her body but with everything she had been denied. The midwife's voice cracked through the silence. "Good. That's it. Again." The pressure was unbearable. Amina's vision blurred. Her ears rang. Her chest screamed for relief. Still she pushed again. Then she collapsed. The women panicked. "She's losing too much strength." Her breathing, look at her chest. "Is she fainting?" Mama Tunu leaned close, her lips trembling slightly now. "Amina, hear me. We are here. Don't leave this moment. You've already come too far." But Amina heard nothing. Not as words. Just echoes. And in those echoes, her mother's voice returned again. "Pain is not the enemy. Fear is. Let the pain move. Ride it like river. But do not fear it. You were not made to break." A tear slipped from the corner of Amina's eye. Suddenly, something shifted inside her. A roll. A turn. A final stretch of agony, but this time different. Purposeful. The midwife gasped. The baby turned. Another woman ran to add more firewood. Another reached for a fresh cloth. Mama Tunu gripped Amina's hand and whispered with conviction, "This is your moment, child. This is when even silence speaks." Amina's chest began to rise again, slowly, steadily. Her fingers twitched. Her knees bent slightly. Her eyes opened, glassy but present. And with every ounce of her remaining strength, she gave one final push that tore through her like a storm. Then came silence. No one moved. The midwife crouched low, checking, adjusting, listening. And then, a cry. Not loud at first. More like a whisper with breath. Then it swelled, strong and high and clear, filling the hut with a sound so holy even the fire seemed to pause. Mama Tunu wept openly. The midwife lifted the baby, slick and trembling, and announced, "A girl. She is here." Amina smiled faintly. Her lips trembled and her voice, barely audible, escaped, "She made it." The baby was placed on her chest and instantly her small hand gripped Amina's finger. The women stood in awe, watching mother and child as if witnessing a sunrise for the first time. "She carries something rare," one whispered. "She was born through stillness," said another. "Born of a woman who spoke no curses, no complaints," Mama Tunu added. "Only breath, only fire, only light." And still, Baraka was not there. He did not hear the first cry. He did not witness the silence before it. He did not see how close Amina came to fading, only to pull herself back for the sake of something greater than him. Outside the chanting had stopped. The village women waited quietly, their ears tuned to the moment. When they saw Mama Tunu step out and nod, a wave of relief passed over them like wind before rain. But none of them knew what had happened inside that hut. That the baby had turned at the last moment. That death had come close. That silence had nearly become farewell. Only Amina knew. And she held her daughter to her chest, still breathless, still weak, but alive. Because the quietest moments often birth the most powerful destinies. And in her silence, Amina had birthed a storm that would one day shake every name that once dismissed her. The midnight air was still, thick with the scent of ash and lemongrass. Outside the birthing hut, the last of the embers glowed red under the clay pots. The village women had grown quiet, no longer chanting or clapping, but watching with reverent eyes. Inside, the firelight flickered along the walls as Amina cradled her newborn child against her chest. The baby girl's skin glistened in the dim light, still damp but warm, her breath shallow and steady, her tiny fingers curled tightly against her mother's skin. Then someone noticed it. Mama Tunu, who had leaned in to adjust the baby's wrap, stopped suddenly. She narrowed her eyes, adjusted the lantern closer, and placed a weathered hand gently over the baby's small chest. The skin there was smooth, but beneath the curve of her collarbone, a golden hue glowed faintly, like a patch of morning sun resting on her skin. The women gasped. "It's not a rash," one whispered. "No," Mama Tunu breathed, This is a mark." The older women drew in close, one after another, each murmuring prayers under their breath. One of the elders touched her forehead, then her chest. "She is marked," Mama Tunu said with certainty. "Marked by the ancestors. I've only seen it once before, and that child grew to change everything." Amina looked down at her daughter, her arms trembling, her body still heavy with exhaustion but her spirit suddenly alert. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry, a high lilting sound that pierced the silence of the hut and echoed through the compound like a bell in a temple. The sound was not loud, but it was unlike anything they'd heard. It was not the cry of pain or hunger. It was the cry of arrival. Amina, with dried sweat on her brow and blood still beneath her nails, whispered, "Zara." The women looked up. "Zara?" one repeated. "She blooms where thorns once were," Amina said softly. "That is her name." They nodded, some smiling through tears. The name suited her. Zara, the flower of hardship. Born not in comfort but through fire. Birthed not to applause but to silence and pain. And yet here she was, whole, radiant, marked by gold. Outside, the moon had tilted west, and the sky began to shift from black to indigo. Roosters stirred. A cold wind blew across the banana leaves. Inside, Amina rested with Zara curled against her breast. Mama Tunu had wrapped both in clean cloth and placed herbs under the bedding. The fire was low, the room quiet again. The midwife whispered blessings over the baby's forehead. And slowly, the women began to leave the hut in pairs, silent and respectful, letting mother and child bond under the gaze of starlight. Then came dawn. And with it, Baraka. He stumbled into the compound just as the sun split the horizon in gold and fire. His steps were uneven. His wrapper hung loosely around his waist. His breath carried the scent of cheap palm wine and roast goat. His face was bloated from sleep and smoke. And his eyes, when they landed on Mama Tunu waiting at the door, held no urgency, no shame. He yawned. "She gave birth already?" Mama Tunu didn't answer. She stepped aside without a word. Baraka entered the hut, ducking beneath the low doorway. He looked around once, squinting at the smoke in the air. And then his gaze fell on Amina, sitting upright now, Zara still asleep in her arms. He stared at the baby, stepping closer but not too close. The golden mark was visible in the slant of sunlight cutting across the floor. He frowned. "Another girl?" he muttered. Amina looked up at him. She didn't blink. Didn't nod. She simply stared, her lips pressed in a line, her arms tightening protectively around Zara. Baraka scratched his beard and shrugged. Well, at least she looks strong. He turned toward the wall, eyeing the remaining herbs and clean cloth. "I'll send something later. Maybe a goat." Amina still said nothing. Not a word. Baraka shifted uncomfortably. The silence stretched too long. "You did well, I suppose?" he added, as though it were a chore completed in his absence. Still no answer. And in that silence, something inside Baraka twitched. He looked again at the child. Then at Amina. Then at the doorway. But Amina's eyes never left his face. They held no tears. No fury. No desperation. Just clarity. Just a quiet understanding that whatever he had once been to her, he was not that anymore. She had brought life into this world without him. She had faced death and turned it away. She had clung to breath while he clung to indulgence. And now she held something he would never fully grasp, not because he wasn't present but because he wasn't worthy. She looked down at Zara again. Her thumb traced the golden patch on her daughter's chest. "This mark," Mama Tunu said from the door, "was placed where a father's hand should have been. And still, the child is whole." Baraka didn't reply. He turned, muttered something about needing rest, and walked out of the hut, the scent of fermented wine following him like a curse. Inside, Amina kissed Zara's forehead and whispered again, "You are my flower. And you are gold, though the blind may never see it. Because some men only see value in what shouts for their attention. But what is sacred? What is golden? It's often quiet, small, sleeping in a mother's arms at dawn. And only those who can see with the heart will ever know its worth." Baraka barely stayed past sunrise the morning Zara was born. By midday he was gone again. Back to Kandoy, back to Safia and her easy laughter, her warm meals, and her childless womb that never reminded him of who he had become. At first, no one noticed how detached he was. Men often kept their distance in the early weeks of childbirth, claiming tradition or busyness or superstition. But as days turned into weeks and Zara began to coo and wriggle and stretch, Baraka's absence grew louder than drums. He did not hold her. He did not ask her name. He didn't even offer the goat he had mentioned on the day of her birth. Instead he told stories. In Kandoy he described Amina's delivery as a near tragedy. "The baby came early," he muttered to Safia one night, poking at grilled cassava. "Weak, fragile. Not much hope, really. I doubt she'll last long." Safia blinked. "But she survived?" Baraka shrugged. "For now. Amina insists on calling her Zara. Flower of all things." "Umph." He chuckled, but his eyes didn't join in the laugh. They darted away, landing nowhere. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that the child had been born strong, with lungs that echoed like war drums and a golden mark on her chest. That the village women had wept at the sight of her. That Mama Tunu had called her spirit-marked. That Amina had stared down death with clenched fists and walked out holding a daughter whose eyes already saw too much. He didn't say these things because they made him small. And Baraka had grown used to feeling large. Back in the village, Amina moved like river water. Quiet. Steady. Unstoppable. She nursed Zara, bathed her in warm herbs, wrapped her in clean cloth, and sang lullabies passed down from her own mother. She never asked about Baraka. Never mentioned his name. The villagers did, of course, behind trees, under breath, with shaking heads. The man has no shame. He lies to the second one like she's a mirror. And the child? She's not ordinary, that one. Indeed, Zara was changing quickly. Too quickly. By the time she was 6 weeks old, she was lifting her head fully, following movement with sharp eyes. At 3 months, she began crawling, clumsy, determined little strides that left lines in the red earth behind her. She laughed at shadows and watched people like she understood their secrets. One afternoon, a traveling herbalist from the north stopped at the well, saw Zara curled under the neem tree beside Amina, and froze. "This one," she whispered, bending closer. "She is not just child. She is spirit come early." Mama Tunu, who had overheard, simply nodded. She chose her mother carefully. She waited for pain to pass before arriving. Zara giggled and grabbed the herbalist's necklace, eyes sparkling with mischief. Baraka never saw it. He came by once in the 2nd month, pacing by the fence like a man measuring failure. Amina stood at the doorway, Zara on her hip. She didn't call him in. He didn't ask to enter. They simply stared at each other across the invisible bridge they had once built together. He noticed the baby's golden mark again, still visible in the evening light. Strange color, he muttered. She was born that way, Amina said. That's not normal. Amina didn't reply. He cleared his throat. I don't have time to stay long. Safia needs help preparing for her cousin's visit. Amina nodded. Zara stared at him, silent, serious. Baraka shifted uncomfortably. Anyway, I just came to see if you needed anything. We have what we need, Amina said quietly. He nodded again, turned and walked away without holding his daughter. Zara didn't cry. She simply looked back up at her mother, as if knowing already what kind of father she had been born to. The village began to whisper more boldly. That girl is growing too fast. She watches like an elder. Did you see how she calmed the screaming boy at the well? She carries something old. Amina heard it all. But she didn't speak of signs or spirits. She only smiled gently, fed Zara porridge mashed with pawpaw, and tucked her in close at night. When Zara cried, she would whisper, "Bloom gently, my flower. They won't all understand your roots." Baraka, meanwhile, grew more distant even from Safia. He snapped easily, argued more. He had expected that marrying a second wife would cure the ache of disappointment, the discomfort of a marriage shaped by years of childlessness. But Safia had begun to ask questions too. Why do you look away when you say her name? Why do you never speak of the child? Why do the villagers look at you like that? Baraka had no answers that weren't soaked in guilt. So he lied again. They exaggerate. That girl, she's not special. Just a child like any other. But even as he spoke the words, something in his gut twisted. One night, alone by the cooking fire, he drank deeply from a gourd of palm wine. The stars above were clear, sharp. The wind carried a strange rhythm, soft, high, almost like laughter. He turned, startled. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence. But somewhere, somehow, he felt something watching. Not haunting. Just watching. And he hated it. Because deep down he knew. He had walked away from a miracle. He had left before the answer arrived. And now, that miracle was blooming, without his name, without his hands, without his blessing. He would hear of Zara's milestone secondhand. He would learn of her walking before other babies, of her soothing crying infants with a simple hum, of her asking questions too complex for her age. And every time he would nod and smile and pretend it meant nothing. But alone it would gnaw at him. Because sometimes when you leave too soon, you miss the very thing you once prayed for. And that absence, that knowledge, is its own kind of punishment. It was the dry season when he came, a tall man wrapped in layers of rust-colored cloth, beads around his neck, and a staff made of twisted ebony wood carved with symbols that looked older than language. The villagers knew his kind, a healer from the southern lakes, a man who read dreams, spoke to trees and heard the heartbeat of the soil. He arrived without fanfare just as the sun was sliding down the hills. Children ran beside him, curious about the bells tied to his ankles that jingled with each step. He smiled, but his eyes were already scanning, searching. When he reached the village square, he stopped, stood still, closed his eyes, then pointed. To her, he said softly, the one marked by the sun. Everyone turned. Amina stood outside her hut, Zara balanced on her hip, her golden mark glowing faintly in the dying light. She hadn't seen the man arrive. She didn't know why he was pointing. But when his eyes met hers, she felt a strange warmth move through her chest. The healer stepped forward. "Child of light," he said gently, addressing Zara. "You've pulled me here." Zara blinked up at him and smiled, softly, curiously, like someone greeting an old friend. "I've walked 4 villages," the healer said to Amina, "but I dreamed of her in all of them. May I bless her?" Amina hesitated. She looked at Mama Tunu, who nodded solemnly. "Let the blessing come," the elder woman said. "No harm follows this man." They gathered under the great baobab tree where prayers were usually whispered before harvests. The villagers watched in respectful silence. Some women clutched their wombs. Others carried newborns in slings. Baraka, who had just returned from Kandoy, stood at a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight. The healer began the ritual by lighting dried herbs in a clay bowl. The smoke curled upward and he hummed, low and rhythmic, like thunder humming far beneath the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his staff and motioned for Amina and Zara to step inside. "Sit," he said softly. Amina obeyed. Zara reached for the staff. The healer's hand hovered, unsure. But then he let her touch it. The moment Zara's fingers brushed the dark wood, it pulsed. A golden shimmer flickered up the staff, brief but undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The healer dropped to one knee. She is chosen, he said. She carries the spirit of Nuru, the one who brings healing. In her life, barren wombs will bloom. Her touch will wake what others say is lost. He looked up at Amina. Raise her with gentleness, but do not hide her. She is not only yours. Amina, stunned, could barely breathe. Zara cooed and clutched the man's robe. Within hours, the news had spread across the village like wind before a storm. They called her Msakana wa Mwanga, the girl of light. At first, only one woman came to see Amina the next morning. Then 3 more the next day. Within a week, 10 women had come, some weeping, some simply curious. Each asked the same question. Can I hold her? Amina allowed it, nervously at first, then with growing peace. And something began to happen. One woman who had not conceived in 10 years reported the return of her moon cycle the day after holding Zara. Another woman who'd lost 4 pregnancies felt movement in her womb for the first time. A third came after being told by healers that her womb was asleep. She returned weeks later, whispering, I am awake. Amina never promised anything. She said no grand words. She simply sat beneath the neem tree and held her daughter as women arrived and wept and touched and hoped. Mama Tunu watched from the steps, nodding, quietly keeping count of every miracle. But not everyone rejoiced. Baraka grew sour. He watched from afar as the women came, carrying fruit and cloth, singing songs of praise not to him, not to the house he had built, but to the child he had refused to name. This is madness, he told Safia one night. They act like the child is a prophet. She is only a baby, Safia said carefully. No, he snapped. She's just lucky. All babies are special if you stare at them long enough. But even as he spoke the words, the bitterness crawled into his throat and lodged there. He had prayed for a child for years. Fasted. Made sacrifices. Blamed Amina. Took another wife. And now the child had come, but had not come for him. The villagers whispered that Zara didn't smile at Baraka the way she smiled at others. That she seemed to ignore him, turn her face when he approached. That his arms, when he dared to hold her, made her restless, fussy, unsettled. And Baraka? He stopped coming altogether. People noticed. She blooms in his absence, one said. He walked away from his own gold, said another. But Amina said nothing. She nursed Zara in peace. When asked about Baraka, she simply replied, he will see what he missed when the world already knows. Because gold, when buried, does not stop being gold. It only waits. And Zara, this child of the sun, this spirit girl with the golden mark, had not come to wait for her father to catch up. She had come to shine. And now the world was beginning to see. The days passed like petals falling slowly from a tree that knew its roots were deep. Amina said little, moved gently, and carried Zara on her hip with the steadiness of a queen crossing her courtyard. No throne, no crown, just presence. The village no longer called her just Baraka's wife. They called her Mama Zara. The title clung not to her marriage but to her grace. Meanwhile, in Kandoy, Safia was beginning to feel the shift. It started with the silence. The way women no longer paused outside her hut to chat as they used to. How their greetings felt hollow now, rushed, distracted. How they glanced in the direction of Amina's village before finishing their sentences. One day she overheard 2 girls drawing water at the well. I heard the child blinked and the baby stopped crying. No. I heard the barren woman's belly moved after holding her. She touched my sister's eyes, one whispered, and now she reads without squinting. The story spun in circles and they always pointed back to Zara. Safia clenched her jar tighter and walked home in silence, a strange unease settling on her like dust. That evening she sat beside Baraka as he roasted maize over open flame. People talk too much, she said quietly. Baraka grunted. About her, she added, not needing to say Amina's name. He said nothing. Safia looked at him. They think the child is special. He scoffed. Fools worship anything they don't understand. Then why don't you go and show them what they should understand? He snapped the maize stick in half. Because it's nonsense, Safia. It's all witchcraft, don't you see? Amina has always had a way with herbs and words. She's twisting people's minds now with that golden-marked child. Safia's eyes widened. You think she cursed the child? Baraka stood, angry now, dusting his hands violently. I think she curses the air I breathe. I gave her everything, and she gives birth to a mystery that turns the whole village against me. But you left her while she labored. She was strong enough without me, he barked. She had her women, didn't she? Her fire and her chants? What more does she want? Safia flinched at his tone and suddenly, something in her settled. She had spent the better part of a year trying to be softer, gentler, younger, thinking maybe that would keep his gaze, his kindness. But now she saw it clearly, it wasn't Amina he resented. It was himself. Safia stood and walked inside without another word. She had no appetite for blame anymore. Back in the village, Amina peeled yams by the fire, her baby resting nearby on a folded cloth. Zara was growing fast, already standing with support, already mimicking sounds and folding her hands in prayer before sleep. At night, Amina taught her quiet verses in their mother tongue. Light does not compete with shadow. It simply exists. And in time it shines. She didn't speak of Baraka. Not to Zara, not to the villagers. She didn't scold, didn't compare, didn't boast. When asked if she would go back to him if he apologized, she smiled faintly and said, "I have nothing to go back to. I am already where I was meant to arrive." The women noticed. Mama Tunu would say, "See how she walks? That is a woman who has stopped waiting for apology." One day, a group of young wives gathered under the shade of the Morina tree. One asked, "But why doesn't she fight? Why doesn't she confront the second wife? Or call Baraka a dog?" Mama Weeksa, who had been listening, chuckled softly. "Because queens don't chase dogs, child. They sit on thrones the dogs can never reach." The others laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was reverence. Safia heard those words too, on another day in another way. A woman from her own village who once flattered her constantly now said casually, "Amina has something you can't compete with. Peace." And that was the wound. Because no matter how many cloths Safia wore, how many spices she crushed, or how much attention she begged for, she could not imitate peace. She could only chase it. And peace, true peace, never ran. So Safia tried one more time. She went to the village, to Amina's compound, under the pretense of delivering herbs. Her palms sweated the whole walk there. Amina greeted her with a warm nod, offered water, then sat on the mat weaving palm threads into rope. Zara sat beside her, tracing the edge of a basket with her fingers. Safia stared at the child. "She looks healthy." "She is," Amina replied calmly. "She's loved by many." "She is," Amina repeated. Safia's words faltered. She'd expected fire, sarcasm, something to provoke. But Amina gave her none of it. "Do you hate me?" Safia finally blurted. Amina looked up, eyes steady. "No." "Then why don't you fight?" Amina smiled slightly. "Because what is mine can't be stolen. And what was never mine, I release." Safia opened her mouth but nothing came. She stood, confused and angry and embarrassed. As she turned to leave, Zara crawled forward, touching Safia's hand gently, just for a second. Safia blinked. The child's fingers were warm. She said nothing and walked away, her mind tangled. Later that night she cried, not from shame but from something deeper. Something she couldn't name. She hadn't lost a war. She had simply walked into a temple thinking it was a battlefield. And the woman she thought was her rival had never been fighting. In the following weeks, more women came to Amina. Not only for Zara's touch, but for her silence. For her way of listening. For her grounded calm. She taught them how to boil leaves for moon pain, how to quiet a child with touch, how to find rest when the world spins too loud. She never raised her voice. She never raised her hand. And yet she rose. Above jealousy. Above gossip. Above Baraka and the wound he refused to acknowledge. Because some women do not rise by fighting. They rise by standing still while everything false falls around them. The morning sun was tender that day, not harsh. It painted the sky in soft hues of orange and honey, as if even the heavens had chosen a gentler voice for what was about to unfold. Amina rose early, dressed Zara in a clean wrap the color of the new moon, and swept her compound in slow, deliberate strokes. Today wasn't a celebration. It wasn't that kind of joy. It was quieter, older, like the kind of joy that grows from roots, not from noise. She lit incense. Ground dried herbs in a calabash bowl. Placed woven mats under the neem tree where Zara liked to sit and watch ants carry leaves bigger than themselves. It was a day of thanks, not for wealth, not even for healing, but for presence, for survival, for the unseen hands that had carried her through labor alone and loneliness louder than any pain. Mama Tunu arrived first, with 2 gourds of honey water and a bundle of fresh lemongrass. "I felt something in my bones last night," she said, placing the bundle near the mat. "Your girl will speak today. Not with words, but with spirit." Soon others came. Mama Weeksa brought an old drum, faded and cracked, but still strong enough to hold rhythm. Young women who once touched Zara in desperation now came carrying fruit and cloth, singing softly. Elder men arrived without being called, men who rarely attended anything that wasn't a burial or a council. They all came. But Baraka did not. He was in Kandoy, they said, busy preparing for guests, 2 merchants from the coast. Safia had begged him to stay back when she heard rumors of Amina's gathering, but Baraka had waved her off. Another one of her theatrics, he said. Let her dance with smoke and shadows if she wants. I have real business to attend to. And so he missed it. The moment Zara, now walking with the steadiness of a child far older than her years, wandered to the center of the gathering. She looked up at the elders, then down at the ground. Without a word from Amina, she knelt, placed both palms on the red earth and began to hum. The sound rose like wind through reeds. It wasn't a child's melody. It was older, layered. A lullaby no one had taught her. Not Amina, not Mama Tunu. But everyone recognized it. It was the morning tune sung by the midwives of generations past, a song believed lost. A song that once marked the safe arrival of newborns and honored the mothers who gave everything. The humming grew into soft syllables, vowels drawn out in reverence, like rain falling on clay rooftops. Some began to weep. The drumbeat matched her breath. The trees stilled. Even birds seemed to pause their wings midair. Elder Kafa stepped forward. His knees bent slower these days, but his spirit moved fast. This is no ordinary child, he declared. She carries the voice of our foremothers. Another elder added, the hands of midwives guide her tongue. She sings with memory she never lived, but still knows. Mama Weeksa whispered, it is as if her blood speaks a language her mouth only recently remembered. Amina stood behind her daughter, hands folded, eyes lowered. She didn't speak. She didn't claim credit. She had never needed to. The village gathered around the child, not in awe, not as worshippers, but as witnesses. They knew what they were seeing was rare. Not magic. Not spectacle. But truth made flesh. Spirit made small. Gold wrapped in skin. Then Mama Tunu walked to Amina's side. She didn't raise her voice. She simply leaned in, touched Amina's arm and said, you gave birth to gold while he chased shadows. Amina's eyes moistened, but no tears fell. She looked up at the sky, then down at Zara, and nodded, because she had always known. Baraka's absence didn't matter now. His silence, his bitterness, his lies, none of it had stopped what was meant to bloom. The child he dismissed had bloomed without him. The wife he abandoned had found honor without asking. Amina sat down beside Zara as the ritual ended, cradling her daughter gently, rocking with the fading rhythm of the drum. And all around them, the village hummed with something that couldn't be named. Not pride. Not pity. But reverence, for the woman who waited, who never fought to be seen, who never shouted for justice. She had simply endured. And in doing so, she let honor find its way back home. The dry season had returned, but this time it came softer, like an elder greeting old friends rather than a storm reclaiming land. The sun was still harsh, but its light carried gold, not judgment. The earth cracked but gave way to flowers anyway. And in the center of it all, under the great baobab that had once shaded her birth, Zara sat with her legs crossed, grinding herbs with a practiced calm beyond her years. She was only 5, yet she moved with the precision of a woman 10 times her age. Her eyes, still rimmed in that mysterious amber glow, watched everything. The women who came limping with swollen knees, the children brought with stubborn fevers, the grieving mothers with flat bellies who knelt quietly, simply wanting to touch her hand. She said little. She did not need to. Beside her, Amina moved like the wind between branches, always there, always silent, always vital. Her hands taught. Her voice soothed. Her pride lived quietly in the way she allowed Zara to lead, and the way she stepped in only when the girl paused to rest. Their hut had become a place of restoration. Not a clinic. A sanctuary. Word had spread far beyond the village now. They came from Jiru Mbale, Kisama, women wrapped in kaitenj cloth with tired feet and hopeful eyes. Some carried gifts, honey-woven fans, carved spoons. But Amina never charged coin. Healing, she said, must remain sacred. Zara was different now, not just special, not just gifted, but called. And her calling had rooted itself not in rituals or chants, but in presence. When she placed her hand on a fevered brow, the child always slept. When she pressed leaves into water and told a woman to drink, the wounds softened, the pain dulled. They called her Bintiya Nuru, daughter of light. And still, Amina never once claimed credit. She only looked to the sky some nights, where the stars blinked like old friends and whispered, "Thank you for the storm that brought her." But far from the circle of warmth and wonder, Baraka aged bitterly. Kandoi no longer welcomed him. The merchants he once tried to impress had gone. Safia, tired of the cold in his eyes and the jealousy in his tongue, packed her things 2 years after Zara's naming ritual and walked away. "You chase gold while holding stones," she'd said. He never remarried. He lived alone now in a fading compound with termites eating through the chairs. He often sat at the edge of the market watching people pass without greeting him. Some looked at him with pity, others with silence. But it was not until he heard the story from a traveler, of a child healer with eyes like flame and a name like a flower, that he knew the truth had not faded. It had flourished. Without him. He did not sleep that night, or the one after. By the third dawn he rose, bathed slowly, and walked the long path back to the village he once called home. He wore no fine cloth, carried no gifts, just guilt clinging to him like sweat. When he reached Amina's compound, he stood outside for a long time. The sound of grinding stones echoed gently. The scent of crushed lemongrass filled the air. And then her voice, familiar, unchanged. "Baraka." He looked up. Amina stood in the doorway dressed simply with her scarf tied back. I didn't expect," he stammered. "I did," she said. He shifted. "I came to see her. Zara." Amina stepped aside. "She is inside. But I must ask you something first." Baraka met her eyes for the first time in years. There was no hatred there. Just something far heavier. "You left during labor," Amina said gently. "Now you must labor to earn what you left." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "You want to see her. But seeing isn't the same as witnessing. Witnessing requires presence. Or truth. You were absent when it mattered. Now you must prove that your return means something." Baraka lowered his gaze. "I have nothing left to prove with. Just shame." "Then start with that," Amina said. "It's more honest than pride." He nodded slowly. His lip quivered. "Can I sit with her?" Amina nodded once. "She knows you're here." He stepped inside. And there she was, Zara, kneeling over a bowl of crushed morina, stirring carefully with her small fingers. She looked up and paused. Her eyes studied him, not like a child meeting a stranger, but like a soul meeting another who had taken the long way home. Baraka opened his mouth, closed it, dropped to his knees. "I don't have the words," he whispered. "Only the regrets." Zara blinked. Her gaze did not soften, but it did not harden either. She reached out one hand, placed it gently on his shoulder. "Peace," she said. That was all. And in that one word, Baraka felt something crack in him. Not pain. Not even grief. Just release. Like chains slipping quietly off wrists. He wept. Not loudly. Not in spectacle. But in the quiet gasps of a man who finally realized what he had done, and what he had missed. Amina watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely. She did not intervene. He had left in her hour of need. But now he was learning that love does not erase betrayal, it outgrows it. That forgiveness isn't an invitation back, but a bridge toward peace. That what is born in pain, if nurtured with truth, can become power, not wound. Zara continued to stir the herbs as if nothing had happened. But something had. A man had returned, not to reclaim but to confess. A child had spoken, not to bless but to release. And a mother had witnessed the full circle of what dignity, patience, and truth can grow when they are watered with silence and bathed in grace. Legacy, after all, is not who remembers you. It's what grows after you leave. And in Zara's eyes, it had already begun. Gold is not always mined from mountains. Sometimes it is born from a woman's body when no one is watching. Amina was left behind, not just in labor but in love. Yet from her pain she birthed a light the world could not ignore. She did not scream. She did not chase. She waited, and in her waiting she was crowned by grace. May every woman who has ever been left in the middle of her storm remember, what they walk through may hurt, but what they give birth to might one day heal the world.